We'll be learning on behalf of all the Cholim, Klal Yisrael, and others I want to add is Simcha Bat Ethel and Selma Bat Rachel amongst the Cholim. Okay, so the next malacha is Makei B'Patish, which means to apply a finishing touch. There are 8 prohibitions. There's only a prohibition, so this is going to be a short one. Okay. A, any activity which culminates in a complicated manufacture, fashioning into a finished form. B, repairing a machine or instrument. C, glazing earthenware. D, putting laces into new shoes for the first time. E, tearing off a protruding thread from clothing. F, setting aside truma and maisa, that's tithes for the Kohen and the Levi, from food made from produce grown in Israel. G, tevilas kelim, that's putting vessels into a mikveh, acquiring utensils into a mikveh. And the last one, playing musical instruments, which it should have said here, it should have added a corollary here. Music, because if you're playing a guitar and the string breaks, you may come to repair it. That's why it's prohibited. It's not. I don't think the actual playing is the problem. It's because you may come to repair a broken string or a key on a piano. You may try to repair it on Shabbos.
Okay.
Makei b'Patish, to apply the finishing touches, and I'm sure most of us have actually heard of that.
It's called the final hammer blow in English.
Hammer blow, yes.
Yeah, meaning it renders it productive. So, for example, I had to ask a Shala once because my glasses were broken, and I'm like Stevie Wonder and Ray Charles put together without my glasses. So I wanted to know if I could just put it together because it made glasses functional. Those are the sort of implications. Without it, it's different. So I couldn't find a shell. I just stuck in contact lenses. All right, guys, we ended off in 48A2 yesterday. We're going to continue on that same page. The Mishnah states, if one brought his oxen to a homeowner's courtyard, etc. So the Gemara discusses another instance of damage involving one person's ox in another's domain. Rava said, if one brought his oxen to the homeowner's courtyard without permission, and the ox digs pits, ditches, vaults in the courtyard, basically, when it uses that expression, it refers to any sort of excavation that like renders the land unseemly. You know what I mean? Like a hole is dug. It doesn't matter how you do it. You're creating a hazard, basically, right? So what happens is the owner of the ox is liable to pay for the damage to the courtyard. And the owner of the courtyard is liable for damage caused by the pit, ditch, or vault. So that is if he declares his property ownerless, thereby allowing the public to traverse it, and an animal falls in the pit, he's liable. Okay? So we're saying, listen, there's no liability to the homeowner if he doesn't make it public territory. Okay? Because then he can control the amount of people coming in, and he could say, listen, watch the step, there's a ditch, etc., on his premises. The halacha of a bor is only generally in a public domain because the person is unaware that obstruction is there. But the ox's owner that created this hazard has to pay for it. But if the homeowner made it public property by saying, listen, this part of my property now belongs to the public as a thoroughfare, he's liable. Okay? So that is if he declares his property ownerless, thereby allowing the public to traverse it, and an animal falls into it, he's liable. And although the master said, who's the master? Obviously the master of the Mishnah. The verse, if a man digs a pit and an animal falls into it, he must make restitution, implies, but not if an ox digs a pit. That is, one is not liable to pay for damage caused by a pit that his animal digs. Okay? So what we are saying is as follows. there's a verse in Shmot, Exodus chapter 21, verse 33 to 34, that you pay for damage done directly by your animal. Like, for example, if your animal gores another animal in Keren, or Shane and Reg, or tramples on something, or it eats something, or you're responsible for your pit, your hazard that you dig, but a person digs it. But not for damage done by a pit that is animal dug, because that's indirect. So you might think that in our case, nobody can be held liable for damage for the excavation that the ox made. That's according to Tosfot. But the rule is, if a man digs but not an ox digs, actually pertains to pits that are initially dug by an animal in the public domain. Since one does not own the pit, we cannot hold him responsible to fill it. The only basis that we can hold liability would be for its initial creation. And then the Torah specifies that in order for one to be liable, it must be created by the person himself and not his animal. But our case is different because the person owns the property containing the pit, and therefore it's his responsibility to fill it with earth again before letting the public walk there. So by declaring his property hefker, ownerless, and ceding it to the public, he's in effect placing a hazard in the public domain. So this is what? It's tantamount to creating a pit. That's according to Rashi and Tosfot. Okay? So we're saying is that since the owner of the courtyard, the Gemara said, is supposed to fill up the pit before declaring his property ownerless, and he did not fill it up, but declared the property with the open pit ownerless, and thereby brought about a hazard in the public domain, it's as though he himself dug it. Okay, so we seem to be learning two laws here. The one law is that in a public domain, if your animal digs up a pit, in that case, it's too indirect. If your animal damages, you're liable. If you as a person dig the pit, you're liable in the public domain, but not if your animal creates the hazard. Fine. But it seems like in private property, you're liable. Why? Because you damaged private property. So that's the case of the owner of the ox in private property. In that case, it says you're liable. However, it was saying, well, what does the owner of the private property have to do with it? Very simple, is that even though it's still indirect, the fact that now he lets the public use it, it's as though he dug it because he failed to fill it. Okay, this is self-explanatory, guys. A related teaching, and Rava said if one brought his ox to the homeowner's courtyard without permission, and the ox damaged the homeowner, or the homeowner was damaged by tripping over it, the ox's owner is liable. But if the ox dropped down, he is exempt. So obviously, according to drop down. Yeah. Well, it's interesting you should say that because we're going to figure out what does it mean. There is a commentary that says, do we mean that the ox died? In other words, but then we learned, funny enough, an interesting Gemara, and this is what that commentary said. Remember where the guy's donkey died in the middle of the public domain, and somebody tripped over it. He's still liable to move the carcass within a sufficient time period. However, if it just dropped dead, then he's not liable. So Gavin's asking a very good question. So what's this term drop down? It means the Gemara actually says, no, it means because he dropped down, meaning he dropped down dung. The ox let dung drop down. Okay? In this case, that's what it means, not that the body of the animal. And there's no permission. So again, you have an ox, you don't ask permission, you're not exempt because the homeowner or his animals don't know that you've got a obstruction there, and they're not expecting to injure themselves against it. But you're off the hook if the ox dropped down. What do we mean dropped down? It means dropped dung. And the damage to which the Brisa refers is that the homeowner's garments were sullied by the dung. Now, so what we're saying is, hang on, if the animal dropped a load of poop, okay, and the homeowner Gavin slipped on it, if he injures himself, the owner of the ox is liable because that's direct bore damage. Okay? But we learned this case. Do you remember of the same daf where we talked about a donkey that dropped dead? We said, hang on a second, what happens if the donkey dropped dung? And we said if the public slipped on it, then you're responsible, according to the opinion. There was a whole thing with Rav Yehuda, etc., and there were different opinions. The one opinion is you have to, just like if you fall in a manhole, you're only liable for the area within the pit that you fall. Is that if you fall, you have to fall on the dung directly in order for you to be liable for bodily harm. There are other opinions that state if you slip on the dung, but you land on the concrete, you're not liable because it's not like a pit, even though it's a tall over pit. Because a tall over pit, if you slip in the pit and halfway through you bang your chin on the lip of it, you're not liable. And others say, of course you're liable. Why are you liable? Because the only reason you slipped is because of that hazard. It didn't mean you have to fall within the circumference or diameter of the hazard. So there are different opinions. But let's just go with the broad opinion that's saying if you slip on dung and you injure yourself, the owner's ox owes you. Let's just put it like that, okay? But we're saying that if he slipped on it, didn't really injure himself, but sullied his clothing, the owner of the ox is not liable. Now, I'm testing you guys. We've done this before. Why? Why is he not liable?
Just give the scenario again. Sorry, I lost focus for a second.
The guy's wife is walking in the yard, and she's dressed in a white dress, the Shabbos best. Doesn't expect to slip in dung of that doesn't exist there from her animals. Again, her and the husband's animals are in the pen. Their next door neighbor brought his ox there without permission. She didn't expect dung outside the patio, slipped on it, and ruined her dress. Now, why is the owner of the next door neighbor ox not liable?
But then it's got to be public. It's got to be because he's got permission.
No, we're talking in case where there's no permission.
Because maybe it's not considered a bore. I don't know.
No, after you've done revision.
I know it. I just because I went through it. Dung is. I remember dung is considered. Damn it! I know what it is because I remember specifically the spot about the dung is considered. It's not considered a. No, it's not a bore.
No, I know what Arthur's trying to say, but that's the point after this one. So we'll get to Arthur's point. So what he's saying is, listen, you're not responsible if you're not responsible with the pit. If a person injures themselves in a pit, okay, not if a person injures himself in a pit. Let me just finish. If a person dies in a pit or utensils are broken, you're not liable for utensils in a pit. Okay, so what are utensils? So utensils are any non-inanimate objects that provide utility, use. We think of utensil like what do you call it, an egg beater or a spatula or kitchen-based implement. But a utensil in this case is a dress, the woman's dress, because it's the utility is it clothes her. So for a board damage, you're not responsible for damage to utensils or her dress. So therefore, if the dung damaged the dress, you're not liable. Okay? That's according to Shmuel. That fits well with Shmuel. But this does not fit well. Why does it fit well with Shmuel? Because Shmuel says any obstacle, whether the owner possesses it or not, is considered a bore. So he's saying for bore, you're not responsible for damage to utilities and utensils, like the woman's dress, so that we understand. With Rav, we have a bit of a problem. Because Rav says it's considered a bore only if the owner declared it ownerless, right? But if the owner didn't declare the hazard ownerless in a public domain or a private domain where he didn't ask permission, therefore it still surprised the homeowner, in that particular case, he might be liable. Why? Because if your property damages somebody else and you haven't declared it ownerless, Rav says it's like a shore. It's like your ox damaging because it's your property. Does that make sense? Shmuel said you can declare it ownerless or you can still have an attachment to it. Basically, you're not responsible. It's a bor. You're not responsible for utensil damage. Let me give you a primary example with a tolda of bor. Let's take a cell phone that you drop in the public domain. We've used this as an example before, and somebody slips on it. Now, you haven't declared the cell phone ownerless. Why not? Because your contact list, your emails, and everything in terms of information is valuable on that phone, even if it's insured. Therefore, you want the phone back. Okay? So therefore, that's not a hazard you declared ownerless. I'm using a tolda of pit because when you dig a pit, nobody said, that's my pit. I'm proud of my pit. Look unless you're insane. Nobody is proud of that sort of hazard. We're not a dog that creates pits. But so in other words, a pit, you can dig a pit and forget about it and not care. But if you drop an object which can create a hazard, that you generally want back, like a Persian rug on the highway or whatever. So therefore, that's not ownerless. So Rav would say anything that you drop that you don't really declare ownerless that creates damage, you have to pay for, even if it's not under the category of a bor, it's under the category of a shore because it's your property. So therefore, for shore damage, you pay for utensils. Of course you do. Why? How do we know that? We said, don't you remember when a person spits and he's at Shabbos table and he's got blueberries and he spits on a woman's dress? When it lands on a dress, that's like a torda of aish because it's moving, but when it lands on it's like a torda of bor, he has to pay. Okay? Because that's his property damaging. And Shmuel said it's not because he doesn't really want that spit back. So all we're saying is, so according to Rav, what would you say? What would you say? Because it's not, a person doesn't say, I officially declare this dung as ownerless. He doesn't think about it. So the Gemara says, listen, there's no problem according to Rav. Why? Because they say the animal's owner generally renounces ownership of its dung so that it's classified as a bor, even according to Rav. So Rav said the following. Again, Shmuel said, whether you declare it ownerless or not, if you create a hazard in the public domain or in the domain of somebody else where they're not aware it's there, it's classified as bor. Rav is saying that if you do not declare it ownerless, it's classified as a shore because it's your property and you pay for utensils that are damaged. If you declare it ownerless, it's seen as a bor and you're not responsible for utensil damage, just direct damage. So we're saying, well, what a case, because nobody officially declares dung ownerless. They don't make that declaration. They don't even think about it when the animal drops a load. So the Gemara says, no, we're cool with Rav. Why are we fine with Rav? Because nobody marvels at the animal's dung unless they need it for compost. So nobody says, it's my dung, I need my dung. It smells. Who needs it? So therefore, automatically the thought process is nobody's trying to claim their dung back. So therefore, even according to Rav, if it damages a woman's dress that slips on it, you're not liable. Okay, let's go on. The Gemara starts.
Ask you a question.
Yeah.
If you dig a pit, does it mean you really like it?
No, that's exactly the point.
If you dig a pit, I dig a girl.
I dig a pit. It's a Kevin joke. It's a Kevin joke. It's funny.
I didn't even get it. I'm sorry. Kevin, what's that?
Kev, you're on mute, so you can talk what you want.
So the Gemara cites another ruling of Rava pertaining to a trespasser. Now we're dealing with Rava's rule. And Rava said if one entered a homeowner's courtyard without permission and did damage to the homeowner, or the homeowner was damaged through him, he is liable. Okay? Let me explain to you the difference between did damage to him and through him. So the expression he did damage to the homeowner basically means that he committed damage actively, by the force of his actions, either intentionally or accidentally. So basically, when it uses the damage through him, it means the trespasser was passive and the homeowner was damaged through stumbling upon him. So say, for example, I break into the next door neighbor and I don't have a swimming pool and I'm relaxing, right? I'm relaxing there and I've just had a swim and I'm lying on the grass and I fall asleep. And the homeowner comes home and he trips over me and breaks his leg because I fell asleep after 5 beers and a nice day at the pool. Then in that case, I'm liable because I've trespassed, even though it was passive and he tripped over me. Also, if he injured me, he's not liable because what the heck am I doing there without permission? If I, so I'm liable whether, but I'm liable for active damage. What do we mean? So basically, Rava said whether it's active or passive. Rava said you have to pay. What are you doing in the guy's yard after 5 beers passing out? So Rava says you pay then, okay? Or whether you actively run into him by accident because the homeowner's home and you quickly want to escape before he catches you and you bash into him. That's active because your force created it. So either way, Rava says if he tripped over you or you caused it, you're liable because you have no permission to be there. Rava's ruling is qualified. Rav Papa said this rule that the homeowner is exempt for damaging the trespasser was stated only in regard to a case where the trespasser was unaware of the presence, where the homeowner was unaware of the presence of the trespasser. So in other words, he comes home, sun is already set, and he trips over him and he breaks, and he doesn't injure himself, but he breaks a rib of the trespasser. Okay. In other words, I come home, I've got my pool, somebody's lying in my yard after 5 beers, the sun set, and I went to home and I go to the patio stoop. And I think I'm standing on the step and I hear something go crack and it's the guy's rib cage. I'm not liable. Why am I not liable? Because I didn't expect the guy there. So that's because I'm unaware of the presence. That's what Rav Papa said. But if I was aware of the presence of the trespasser and the homeowner did damage to him, he's liable. So I see a guy after 5 beers in my stoop, and I decide to take a baseball bat or a golf club and rib crack him and give him a swing and crack his ribs, then I am liable. But you say, why am I liable? Because this guy's trespassing my property. And the answer is because the trespasser can tell the homeowner, it's granted you have the right to evict me from your property, but you do not have the right to damage me. Okay? So if you know someone's in your yard, you don't have the right to hurt them, but if they won't leave willingly, you can force them to leave. Okay? And we learned that in the 27th and 28th daf, 27b and to 28a. But that doesn't mean when you ask the guy to leave and he won't leave, you pick up a golf club and you hit him across the jaw. We mean that you could point, I suppose, a firearm against him and say, listen, I don't know if you're dangerous, but I don't want to ventilate you with the bullets in your rib cage. Would you kindly leave my premises? Thank you. That you can do because you don't know who you're dealing with there. But you don't have a right to assault him just because he's on your property. In terms of what we would do today in South Africa, it appears that even in America, that with the Democrats, somebody can break into your place and you hurt them and they end up suing you. I mean, only in South Africa can you have somebody that's a convict, Arthur. When I was at Linksfield Park Clinic in the hospital, if a member of the public needs private medical care, they'll send him to a public hospital where the cockroaches are bigger than my cat, okay? Because the guy doesn't have money. But if you break into somebody's home and you want it by the NPA, which is the National Prosecuting Association, us as the taxpayer have to pay for him to have 5-star medical service. like if he had a gunshot wound or whatever by the police, to recover in Linksfield. And they have to pay for a security guard to see he doesn't escape. So if you commit a crime in South Africa, you get first-class health treatment. If you're an upstanding tax-paying citizen, you get no treatment.
So Dan, I had a client of mine. A guy broke into the house. I won't mention color, but a guy broke into the house, and the husband came home, and the guy was actually about to rape his wife. So he went and he kicked him in the head to get it off her, and he killed him. And he had to go through a whole thing. They said no, it was her job to get him off, not his. He had no right to kick him. She had to get him off. Now you're talking about a little woman against a big bloke.
Crazy.
And they ended up going to court. He lost thousands, to prove his case. It was just ridiculous. The guy's in their house, in their lounge, about to do the deed with his wife because he had whatever done to her. Husband saw this, came in, kicked him in the head and killed him. It wasn't a purpose kick. He kicked him to get him off her. Didn't shoot him. I mean, he could have shot him, but he kicked him and he died.
Arthur's crazy. This whole world is crazy. So, all right, let's go on with this show. But Arthur's got a great point. That's exactly the madness we're talking about. So the Gemara finds a parallel ruling by the authors of the previous one, and they follow their own reasoning. For Rava, and some say Rav Papa said. Okay, what do we mean they follow their own reasoning? It means that it was either Rava or Rav Papa, or that they agreed together. But basically, where two people are in a certain place and both of them are acting with permission, okay? In other words, they're in a public thoroughfare or they're in a courtyard that they jointly own. And they've got permission as equal owners or within a public thoroughfare, they've got permission to do that activity. That's with permission, or both of them are acting without permission. They've got no permission to be there. The following laws apply. If you're acting with basically, if you're acting with permission, you're exempt from liability. If you're acting without permission, you are liable to pay. Does that make sense, guys? It's fairly straightforward, nothing complicated. We may infer that the reason both are liable in the case where there's no permission and both exempt from payment where there is permission granted is self-explanatory. But in a case where one party is acting with permission and the other is acting without permission, the law is the one acting with permission is exempt of liability even if he does damage to the other actively, okay? Now, what we're saying by actively, Rashi says this, and it's very important, is that provided he is unaware of the person's presence. So it's not like if somebody can come into your premises, you can actively take a baseball bat to him. Rashi is saying, if that you're actively meaning that you don't trip over him, but you're actively running after him to say, get out, I don't know you, and you bash into him. Does that make sense? Or Rashi is actually not saying that. That would be unintentional. In other words, you don't premeditate. But Rashi is saying even more, that you're not aware of his presence. Because if you are aware of his presence, you can't even damage him actively. Okay. But if, and this is the point, even if you're acting with without permission, and you damage him passively, you're liable. What do we mean passively? You've had 5 beers, you broke into the neighbor's place, you had a good swim, you passed out like Kevin, and then what happens is I come home and it's dark and I trip over the person and I knock out a tooth. Then even though he didn't actively damage me and he was just a stumbling block, how am I supposed to know he's there? He created a hazard and therefore he has to pay. He doesn't have permission. Fine. So let's just quickly go on. The Mishnah states if the trespasser fell into the homeowner's cistern and fouled its waters, the trespasser is liable. This ruling is qualified. Rava said they taught this only regarding a case where the ox fouled the waters at the moment of falling into them. So like the ox was dirty, maybe he had sand and grit or whatever, and he had a bit of poop on him, like, because they don't smell lekker. And when he fell in the water, as Rashba said, it damaged actively. It's a category of shore, which is liable for damage to inactive objects. What do we mean? Is that if it creates a hazard and it's a bore, then in that particular case, you're not responsible for damaging water. Let me explain to you what we mean. A bore is where an animal lies there, and at the time, it doesn't foul the waters, it's clean. And then it deteriorates and decays. Now, then it becomes indirect damage, causative damage. And therefore, the deterioration or decay of the animal's flesh is what actually caused the damage, the stench. But because it's a stench and it's not the actual flesh, then in that case, it's considered like a bore, a hazard. Like it's a water hazard, it's a safety hazard, right? But then you're not responsible for hazards damaging utensils. So how's water utensil? It's utility. Utility is any inactive object that we use for benefit. We have a utility of water for drinking and cleaning ourselves. So any inactive damage where the animal just decays is like a bore creating causative damage because of the stench, and therefore it doesn't pay for anything that was affected like utility or utensils or water or clothing. But why is it considered a shore the minute the animal falls in? Because it's direct bodily contact on impact. So say it's caked with poop. The animal's caked with poop because they don't smell good. I've smelled oxen, and not oxen because I've smelled cows and that. Well, cows don't smell great. So therefore, if it fell in the water and immediately it was dirty and dungy, and then on impact, the whole water, you didn't want to go near it, that's considered groma, direct damage. It's like an ox goring or standing on something, or that's considered a shore. So you're responsible if your property damages utensils, and therefore you have to pay. But if it only fouled up, but it has to foul up the water at the moment of falling into them. But if it fouled the water after falling into them, the owner is exempt from paying, of the ox is exempt from paying for the waters. What is the reason? It's because this case, the ox is classified in the category now of a bore and not a shore, and the waters are classified in the category of utensils. And we do not find an instance where a bore holds, where the Torah holds the owner liable for damage to utensils, okay? So in other words, Rashi is saying, since it did damage inactively, an animal that damages is not classified in the category of shore unless it does the damage actively. If it does it passively, it's classified as a bore, and then because that's the damage of any static object, meaning it's not from impact. Okay, it's according to Rashi. All inanimate objects, according to Rashi, are classified as utensils with respect to the law that they excluded from the rule of compensation when damaged through bore. This is in Shemot chapter 21, verse 33 to 34. And the Torah holds the owner of the bore liable only if an ox or donkey, in other words, a non-human living creature, falls in and dies, but not if a human or utensil falls in and dies. Okay? With respect to a utensil, its breakage is considered its death, and thus bore is excluded from utility for broken utensils. The same exclusion pertains to any spoilage of any inanimate object, including water. That's what Rashi's description is. Okay, Rashi says it best. Fine. So the Gemara therefore revises Rava's statement. Rather, it was stated this is how it works. Rava said they taught that the owner of the ox is liable to pay for the waters, only regarding the case where the ox fouled them with its body. But if it fouled the waters with the stench of its carcass after dying, so let me just explain what the foul of the body means. If it fell like from a height and it fell underneath, and say you've got a cistern that's like 10 meters down, and as, I don't know if you know that when people commit suicide off the San Francisco bridge, when they hit the water, it's like concrete. they find people like they flattened. It's like the water's solid. That's why when you dive, that's why I don't know if you know that when you've got diving, Olympic diving, they have bubbles through the water. So it breaks the oxygen flow, Kevin. This is interesting. It breaks the water so that you don't hit it like solid concrete. That's why it flows. So if you decide to take up high diving, make sure there are bubbles in the water, or there's natural flow. Like when people dive off in the ocean, because there's plankton which creates oxygenation. Anyway, what happens is if the ox gets knocked over and falls in, and from the impact, its stomach bursts. That is direct damage. If that stomach burst fouls the waters, it's at the moment. So then you're covered under shore. That's direct active damage with activity. If the animal rots, the stench is not considered part of the carcass itself, but rather caused to come in being through the decaying carcass. Thus, the carcass merely causes a stench to damage the waters. That's according to Rashi and the Nimukei Yosef. So, and one is not liable to pay for mere causative damage. Okay? All right.
How did that animal get in there in the first place? Maybe it was a funny name.
Yeah, so now what we're saying is the owner of the ox is liable because he let his animal trespass. He doesn't know that the guy's got like a water cistern there, and the next thing is walking with Betsy, and Betsy disappears. He says, "Where's Betsy? She fell down." Because what happens is like you've got a trapdoor in a cistern often, where it's like an underground, like there's a manhole or something, but that manhole was not meant to take a 600-kilogram animal. So Betsy's there, then Betsy's not. Betsy's there, and Betsy's not. And then the guy's walking with his ox, where's Betsy? Anyway, if it's split. So obviously anybody that was, so that's the extent of it. All right, guys, we're done. I tell you where we covered from. We covered from 48A2 to 48B2. Well done, guys. Well, actually 48B1. So that's still 4.